I'd like to welcome you to the USF Department of History's Downtown and the Downtown Partnerships Mid-Century Shopping Walk. So that'll be our theme today. It's a local motion program. We'll be walking. It's going to take about 1 hour. We're going to walk basically 12 blocks that way and straight back down. We're pretty much going to stop at every block as we go down, for the most part.
And we're also going to be focusing on a central theme today, which is the October the 4th, 1957.
That day is the day that actually the Sputnik was launched. So if you've heard of that, it's the first artificial satellite that went up.
And this was the start of the space race. Russia had ultimately beat America in the space race, and this then started off the controversies between who would be the next person in space. Now the space race caused lots of public anxiety.
The theme is anxiety, right? And this is 1950, 1957, and it's the height of the Cold War, and we're going to talk a lot about that war.
So we're going to be looking at the rise of consumerism in the 1950s, the age of anxiety during the Cold War, desegregation at the Woolworth building, the rise of rock and roll, TV and radio at some of the department stores, and then we're going to come back into the present. We're going to look at the landscape of Franklin Street as it is today. Now, as you go through, especially down towards the end of the street, there are a lot of buildings that unfortunately are in a lot of disrepair, and we're going to bring your attention to those and tell you the story of those buildings as well, because at the moment you might not be able to tell what these buildings were or just what they were, especially in the 1950s.
And the reason why Franklin Street was important is because most people they think that Kennedy, which was actually Lafayette in 1957, they think that's the main street downtown, and it's not. Franklin Street was the downtown, what we would call downtown USA.
Right? And most of the downtown's remaining historic buildings are of architectural importance are remaining here, and we'll be looking at those today, such like the Kress building, the Woolworth building, Newbury's, and also the Tampa Theatre.
Franklin Street, as you see it, as we go up here, it is one of the most important remaining downtown historic districts, if not the most important in downtown left.
Our next stop will be with the former Schwobilt men's clothing store, and Steve will be your guide for that one. So we just head over there and we'll go from there. Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and join you. We're also what used to be called Schwobilt's men's clothing store. It's actually right behind you. It's kind of like falling apart and it looks like it's a regular store, but it actually was called Schwobilt. This is one of at least 30 stores that sold men's and women's fashion in 1957. The reason we're here is because we want to talk about consumerism for you and how that kind of got going. At the end of World War II, the government purposely decided to encourage consumerism. It was not just like accidental that it went this way. They actually structured the economy to make it so that people would kind of turn into consumers and want to buy things. The reasons they did it were because they wanted to limit the possibility of depressions, right? We had just gotten out of the Great Depression. It was very present on people's mind. I mean, people write soup kitchens. You guys probably know about all that stuff, right? They wanted to enrich the business leaders, and they wanted to enrich the people, Americans, and raise their standard of living too, and that was how they thought they could do it. They also were thinking about safeguarding America's economic system against communism. So they were thinking, hey, let's really take this capitalism thing kind of to the T's and see what we can do with it. So they remade the economy into the consumer-based one that we all know today and are familiar with. Now, the most important way that the government made consumerism happen for everybody was they encouraged people who were white and middle class to move to suburbia. This is a national phenomenon, okay? It happened everywhere, but it also takes has its own kind of little way that happens in Tampa. The American dream ideology was very much promoted. I mean, they were like, hey, look at these awesome ranch houses out in suburbia that you can go buy, and so it was very much put to the forefront that you should go do this. And what they were thinking was very simple. If everybody moves to suburbia, think about it. All these houses will have to be made. We have to build them all, right? Oh, you need cars now to get to your house in suburbia. Oh, you need to buy stuff to put in your house, like washing machines. So you can see kind of it was like, oh, let's do this. Let's do, you know, and off they go. So, and in 1957, just so you know, they were building out by about Dale Mabry on this side of the Tampa. Up by Temple Terrace was going in big time. The earlier, you know, development, Fowler, Bush. So it was basically a nice little 5 and 6 mile radius around Tampa as we go. So, end of this stop. Let's move on to the next one. We're going to talk about fashion.
A minute.
All the time down that party Friday. Every Friday. Okay.
So, as you can see here, this is actually kind of cool. This is like the coolest thing you'll see all day long. This is a Maas Brothers vintage suit from 1955. Pretty cool. Almost certainly purchased in that store right across the parking lot. Staying right there.
The Maas Brothers was a site of very high-end fashion. If you look in your brochure at the back, you will see there's a newspaper advertisement from 1957 with a lady in a fur coat. And the text is a bit small, but the text alongside is advertising mink and other furs that were available at this time.
Here, fashion was so different than what it is now. It's very, very formal, and it was very specific to men and women compared to the somewhat unisex styles that we have of the day. Fashions were mapped onto social roles that people had. Women were encouraged to be perfect domestic housewives and mothers, i.e. a nuclear family. It was very much an ideal that was kind of like put up for you to aspire to. The strong women of World War II, Rosie Riveter, etc., right? They pretty much, who wore, actually if you look at 1940s movies, they wore kind of pencil skirts and they had like, you know, big shoulder pads. They kind of went back to the home and they left the factory. The new fashion trends reflected these super sexualized, ultra domestic kind of mother and wife thing that was going on. Frilly, swayed out skirts, right? Kind of like with thank you very much. Bullet bras were quite the rage. We won't discuss that today. Let that go. Hat and gloves. That's right, not like last week, right? Hat and gloves were worn outside at all hours, right? I mean, you could not be seen without your gloves. It was, you know, a big thing. The result was there was an emphasis on a very specific kind of femininity. And I'll just leave it at that. Betty Friedan actually ended up writing about a lot of this stuff a few years later in a book called The Feminine Mystique, she kind of really rebelled against this whole idea, right?
And this actually sparked the modern feminist movement, because a lot of women weren't happy with this 1950s lifestyle. Not all of them wanted to be housewives and mothers. So this was an important landmark, in US literature as well, because it sparked people to think about the roles that women were playing. Now, men's fashion in 1957 was also very formal. Now, on on the back of your brochure, you will see there is a man, very, very small, sorry. There is a gentleman in a very nice suit, and Dave if you've seen Dave's suit, Dave has an original Maas Brothers suit and hat.
So I'm dressed perfectly as a man would have been walking down this street here. Always with a hat, thank you very much. Exactly.
Looking good. Yes.
The suits had very narrow lapels like this. They were only narrow like this for a few years, so that's how you can tell in 1952.
Which just emphasises the kind of formality that men were expected to wear during this time. Now they wore suits and ties to many daytime and evening functions. Now the suits had a narrow lapel, and the skin in ties were also coming into fashion as well. Now young men's fashion was also changing during this time. Now they now wore jeans, white t-shirts and flannel shirts. And once again, just as they were with women, hats were an important accessory, and men seldom went outside without them. It would be very unseemly for men to be seen, without a hat, whatever type of function they were going to. We're going to move on now to the Tampa Theatre, but I just wanted to, as part of the preservation of Franklin Street, we have lots of other buildings that we're going to talk about today, and we hope that this walk will enable you to appreciate the history of Franklin Street, so sites like this don't happen over there.
You had everything at your disposal, so there was no need to come downtown and further bowl.
This is in front of the Tampa Theatre, right? Now the Tampa Theater that you see here was built in 1926, uses Spanish Renaissance architecture. It's absolutely gorgeous inside. If you've not been, you really need to go. We're going to talk about a big, huge theme with Tampa's in 1957, and that is the Cold War. Probably one of my most favorite things to talk about, so I apologize if I talk too long. This is between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, if you recall, lasted for 40 years. It was a violent war of ideology for, really, I guess you could say, for world domination. I mean, it was really understood by people of 1957 as a war to the death. That this is our way of life versus their way of life. This is capitalism versus communism. This is freedom versus democracy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was very understood in very stark terms. The outcome of this war was incredibly far from certain. You have to kind of strip away this whole last 30 or 40 years where you know that we won, right? That wasn't clear to people in 1957. In fact, it was kind of the opposite. We had just gotten out of the war in Korea. We lost 35,000 dead, and the best that we could do is fight them to a draw, basically. I mean, this wasn't like, oh, this is we're winning. No, that was not how it was going to be. Again, anxiety is a big thing. There are open-air atomic and hydrogen bomb testing going on in Nevada. It's in the newspaper. People are reading about this, right? Like, wow, maybe that fallout's going to hit me. I don't know. The United States had exploded a 15 megaton hydrogen bomb. This is on people's minds that, wow, my city might, be obliterated in a cinder, And it's just something that we don't really think about all that much today. Americans were even thinking about fallout shelters, right? You can actually buy fallout shelters in some of these apartment shelters. You can buy your own, wow, we should put this up in our backyard. So, and Sputnik and the space race and all of these things kind of contributed to this anxiety. And the anxiety comes out in culture. You can see this very clearly, and especially through movies. Now, there are 4 kinds of movies. There are actually maybe a little more, but I'll simplify it a little bit, right? There are 4 kinds of movies that you will see that are coming out that will talk about the Cold War. The first one were World War II movies. So this is 12 years after the end of World War II. Why are they playing World War II movies in 1957? Promoting nationalism, patriotism, right? We won. Look at the other picture, the nighttime picture, you'll see California Conquest on the marquee in really, really small letters on this nighttime one. Do you see that? Well, California Conquest, what does that sound like? It sounds like a Western. Well, you know what it actually was? It was a movie set in 1840s where Spanish people, i.e. not Americans, tried to give away California to the Russians. So, horror movies, monster movies, right? 1950s are like all these, right? Dracula, 1956, best Dracula ever. Creature from the Black Lagoon, right? Right? Mm-hmm. What about, here's a good one. Now, you think those are, no. That is anxiety coming out. We call them Gothic diversion movies. Never mind big words, anything. That's anxiety coming out. What about Godzilla, right? Yeah. What is Godzilla? He is born of hydrogen bomb testing. And he comes out and, he does. What about Westerns? Here's our last category when we move on from here.
Audie Murphy is.
Why are Westerns so popular in the 1950s? You know why? Nationalism, right? The American spirit. They imagine that we can, without manifest destiny, we can take over this and conquer this land. Well, maybe also the world too, but whatever. So again, 1957, the gunfight at the Oak Corral is one of about 1,000 examples. So you can see, the next time you're watching these 1950 movies, see if you can pick up on these themes when you watch them.
This is the site of the former Woolworth building. It used to be technically called the F.W. Woolworth Five and Dime Store, which was a very popular place to have lunch after a busy day shopping or at the movies, in 1957. Now, one thing that would seem strange to us in 1957 would just be how segregated it was. This was the height of the Jim Crow era. Schools, theatres, and even beaches were segregated. And there were only 3 beaches in Tampa where African Americans could go to. And Tampa itself was very, very segregated.
1960, which is really a couple years after where we were talking about, so we're like 3 years after 1957, the The opening salvos and the battle to desegregate Tampa were held right here in this store at this lunch counter. What happened on February 29th, 1960, you had an initial group of about 43, most of them are students, came in here and sat down at the lunch counter. They closed the counter. Another 15 minutes later, a second group came back, about 57 students. Closed the counter. Sorry. Yeah. Closed the counter. This kept going on. They came back the next day. There was more trouble going on the next day. The white Tampa press, because he actually had two. We had the black press and the white press. The white Tampa press characterized the blacks as a, quote, disorderly, shouting, mob-like throng of more than 100 who shouted taunts and demanded service.
And then the groups kept returning until they were eventually served. Now this was huge news in Tampa, and it received lots of media press as well. Now later on in 1960, because these riots received lots of media attention, the NAACP and the Biracial Committee of Tampa actually stood together in order to propose a method of desegregation that would be a lot more peaceful than what had experienced here back in February. Cody Fowler, who was a member of one of the leading members of the Biracial Committee, in August 1960, sent out a proposed method of lunch counters, a proposed method of desegregation of downtown lunch counters, not just in Tampa, but also in Ybor City and at the Sears department store as well. And then over these 6 months, despite Cody Fowler's despite his proposal for peaceful downtown lunch protests, there was large groups of 100 or more whites that confronted the African Americans.
A group of 5 white men chased blacks right straight down Franklin Street here with axe handles, and bats, not the axes.
They were later arrested for it, but later on they were pardoned and they never went to prison for their crime.
The house of the lawyer who represented the people who were arrested, his house was blown up.
The NAACP had always endorsed peaceful protests, but this time there was lots of black protests against the treatment of the 2 African Americans who were attacked, with axe handles and bats. Axe handles and bats.
Shots were fired into Sumter Lowry's house. About 6 months later, thanks to the efforts of the black community and the white community, they kind of came together. They met down in that Exchange National Bank right down on the corner over there for 6 months, and they were able to desegregate all of Tampa's lunch counters. So
you can see the cultural significance of Woolworth. Unfortunately, its lunch counter has since been demolished, and it's a site it's actually currently undergoing renovations to be torn down to become a parking lot. So unfortunately, all of that history might be ultimately lost. There is a plaque just by the door. You might be able to see it just by the door there. That plaque commemorates the 2 African Americans who were attacked with axe handles and bats. So we can see that the sit-ins were a way to marginalise, for people to rebel against, the dominant white culture, and we will see how these cultural rebellions take shape through other forms when we see, at the next stop. So, especially in 1957, these lunch counters and cities, they give us a glimpse of the important part of the Tampans, and particularly the South, and the segregated culture of the 1950s that was happening not just in Florida, but throughout the South as well. And we'll now move on to the Kress building.
This is the Kress building. It's a very important building to Tampa. To me, if you between this and the Woolworths, if those are the 2 buildings that we saved, that would be good with me. Right? So I would be happy about that. Here, Tampans would purchase, women's clothing, men's clothing, radios, TVs, records, players. They were selling TVs here. TVs was brand new. TVs cost about $125 to $175, up to $250. That doesn't seem like very much. That was up to $1,500 in today's money. This was the beginning of the modern information age, as we know it today. But it's just the very, 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 very beginning, right? Just the beginning. Radio and TV are immensely popular. TV is just coming on the scene. Radio is probably far more important than it was it is today. You know, people listen to the radio all the time. They're really listening to two things. They're listening to jazz and they're listening to rock and roll. Now, jazz was played by both African American and white musicians. This was really the height of it's not the height of the jazz era, it's the height of the musical development of jazz, right? During late 1950s, like the best things came out. Miles Davis. If any of these names ring a bell, no, you would have known about them before. Miles Davis, Dave Brubeck, people like that. So jazz is, but now it's coming on, it's going on the downswing, right? As rock and roll comes on the scene. Now, rock and roll was huge to the younger crowd. It was a completely new sound. Rock and roll pretty much had only been invented in 1951 or 52, or just, you know, people will fight about the dates over time, right? This new is very popular among the younger crowd. It really takes off when Elvis hits the scene. Now, why is Elvis? Look in your code, you'll see a picture of Elvis. Why do we have Elvis here, and why are we talking about Elvis? Well, because Elvis came to Tampa 4 times. Not just one, 4 times. Twice in 55 and twice in 56. So he was huge in Tampa. The picture that you see there is actually him in the Fort Homer Hesterly Armory, which is over there in West Tampa. So that's actually a local shot of him in Tampa. Like desegregation, rock and roll and jazz represent a cultural rebellion against this bigger kind of thing going on. Television was huge, exploded in popularity, right? 90% of all American TVs have a television by the end of the 1950s. At the beginning of the 50s, almost nobody does. So, like, basically everyone goes out and buys a TV during those years. Everyone watches the same few TV shows. Tampa only has 2 televisions. That's it. So if you were like, you know, the battle for the remote control, they didn't have remote controls, but if you had one, you could have just switched from one channel to the next. That was all there was. So let's keep on going here.
There were many stores on the section of Franklin Street, including Singer Sewing, Grayson's Clothing, and also W.T. Grant Company, which is just that building just over there with the silver metal thing on it. And so by the 1950s, we can see, as you can see by this street, many of the businesses were beginning to go out of business. And there were several causes for Franklin Street's decline. One of the most monumental ones was the move to suburbia. Especially after the war, America had a very prosperous economy, and the government then supported consumerism, as we've seen through some of the other stocks further down. Now, these were also supported by government incentives like the mortgage tax breaks and also the GI Bill, which enabled soldiers to purchase homes at a very reasonable price. And there was also, as we saw at the Woolworth building, segregation was also an issue in Tampa at that time, and that was also another force that moved white people out to the suburbs as well. And there was also this quest for new. As you can see, you know, especially in this area, a lot of the buildings were becoming old, they were becoming tiresome, you know, shabby and dirty. And new suburban shopping centres were becoming new, wonderful, very, very easily accessible within the white neighbourhoods. And one of these, the new suburban shopping centres in Tampa, the first one was called the Britain Plaza. Now, as people began to move out of the downtown spaces, urban renewal began to take over. It was the removal of African Americans out into neighbourhoods on the outer skirts of the city, so that Tampa then would become a white community again. Now, many of the Tampa's authorities saw many of the downtown spaces as slums. Now, the Tampa's version of the slum was called the Scrub, excuse the rhyming, was called the Scrub, which was located down Central Avenue. It was essentially a no-go area for white people. It was actually cordoned off due to sanitation issues. There was no running water. There was no air conditioning, of course, at that time, and people lived in squalor, basically. So this was the area that the governments wanted to focus on. They wanted to focus on the slum of the cities, and in the era of urban renewal, cleanse the city of these neighbourhoods and replace them, you know, with something new and exciting. Now, most of these areas, interestingly, were either black or Hispanic. Ybor City and Central Avenue. Central Avenue was the African Americans' business district. It was a thriving community of movies, of businesses, of shops, and also residents as well. Now, this area and areas of in Ybor City were completely obliterated in the process of urban renewal.
All those parking lots. So when you see all these parking lots around here, you'll be like, hey, that's what happened. Urban renewal happened.
And this is when we come on to the interstate. You can't see it from here, but the interstate is just a few blocks away. It essentially divided the city in half. It came right through the African American, all of the Hispanic neighborhoods, in order to join on to 75 a few years down the line. So this is when we have the city completely divided into half, and we have thousands of displaced people because of this. And also the landscape of Tampa then became removed from a shopping experience into a central business district, as we can see today. Workers only came downtown for jobs. The idea was that you could, with the new interstate, you could come into town, you could go out of town to your suburban community where you have everything to your disposal. So therefore, as you can see around you, the shops then became deteriorated. The landscape of the downtown then became pretty much, as you see it today. There was pretty much no reason for people to come downtown anymore, and then gradually businesses moved out of here and into the new shopping centres. Now, one of the most important factors in Franklin Street's decline was the move to suburbia, and then followed by these secondary reasons such as urban renewal and also the quest for the new as well. Because these new suburban neighbourhoods, their homes were pristine, they were clean, and nothing compared to what the downtown was becoming like at that time. We're now going to move on to our final stop, which is going to be at the 1029 Franklin Street, and we'll talk about the modern efforts to preserve Franklin Street.
She just hadn't got.
So this is our final stop, and if you made it with us this far, I really want to thank you for doing so. This building, there's a reason why I wanted to bring you to this building, because this kind of shows you, this is an old building, this is a turn of the century building, it's more than 110 years, give or so, and it's an example of a building that has been preserved successfully. So we wanted to show you, we showed you Maas, it's like a lovely parking lot, and now we wanted to show you one that actually, look, has been preserved, and look how awesome it is, and it's being reutilized, right? There are many examples of wonderful renovations that have happened here in Tampa recently. For example, the Florida Inn Hotel, if you haven't been through that, is gorgeous inside. The Tampa Theater, again, awesome and wonderful to look at. It highlights Franklin Street's diversity, and it really shows that these things can be kind of reused and uses can be made out of them.
Now the Upper North Franklin Street Historical District is not protected by the city, but the wonderful thing about the National Registry of Historic Places is that these buildings cannot be torn down, and if there is structural damage, the owner has a legal responsibility to make sure that the repairs go out. So that is the wonderful thing, especially what the Historical Division are doing over here as well to preserve buildings such as Tampa Theatre and the Kress as well. Now, unfortunately, even though despite that some of these buildings are under the National Registry of Historic Places, they are still in disrepair.
But they need to be preserved for future generations, but they also need to be functional spaces. They need to be turned into lofts or businesses. They can't just sit there and be nothing. So.
And this really was one of the main essences of our walk today. It was to advise you and make you aware just how these buildings, even though they might be in terrible states of disrepair, can be used for different purposes. And it just adds to the character of Franklin Street as well. So this is the end of our walk today. We hope that you've had an insight into the culture of Franklin Street in 1957.
We hope that we maybe taught you one or two things that you didn't know before.
And hopefully it's ignited the passions to learn of its wonderful, diverse urban spaces. If you have any questions about the walk or want to learn more about the history of Franklin Street or access to the photographs that we used or anything, please come talk to us at the end. And next week as well we have the In the Line of Duty tour, which will be led by Steve and Ron over here. And that will be next Friday at 12 o'clock at Gaslight Square. And the following week we have April 26th is the Frontier Walk in Tampa as well. So that'll be 12 o'clock in Gaslight again as well. So I hope you can join us for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.